Okay, so now we're going to talk about searches of college students. So you'll note that many colleges and universities have their own police departments. So whenever it's a police investigated or a police initiated investigation, the Fourth Amendment still applies in its entirety. Okay, so nothing changes as far as law enforcement, even if it's a school cop. Okay, now school officials in private institutions can conduct whatever searches they want to, willy nilly. Nobody cares. There is no Fourth Amendment protections here from these kinds of searches, according to the Supreme Court, because these particular searches um, are considered to be a search between two private individuals. And of course, that would come from Duarte v. Commonwealth, which is found right there in your textbook on page 229. And then, of course, State v. Burroughs out of Tennessee, also on page 229. So just understand that whenever you're talking about a private institution, so like Friends University or Newman University over in Wichita, as a student at that institution, there are no Fourth Amendment protections for you with respect to searches by faculty and staff of that institution. Now, that is interesting, and we're going to talk about that a little bit farther here in just a little bit. But let's move ahead here to school officials in public institutions, such as Seward County Community College. So, as a adjunct faculty with Seward County Community College here, I can conduct a limited administrative search for school regulations. Okay. But I can't act as an instrument of law enforcement. Now, unfortunately, we got to be careful where it comes to me being concerned because I am also a law enforcement agent. So, as a general rule, I would probably not be conducting any searches of anybody on campus unless it was in my law enforcement capacity with a warrant or consent or something like that, just so that I don't blur the lines at all. But, like if you live in the dorms and the resident director wants to come around and conduct a room check for health and safety regulations, absolutely they can. But they can't conduct these searches under the premise of we're going to root out marijuana and alcohol and report you to law enforcement as a result of it. It has to be something for, an administrative search. Okay, so let's move on just a second. And this is where we're going to come into some really hairy stuff. And this is what concerns your Chapter 6 discussion in Canvas. So whenever we talk about the border search exception, basically you have no expectation of privacy upon entering the country through an airport, seaport, or at one of the borders. So if you fly in on an international flight, you have to clear customs first, right? If you come in through the border, you have to declare anything to the Customs and Border Protection agents there at the southern or northern borders. Same thing with a seaport. So we find that there's immigration and customs enforcement agents and customs and border protection agents and customs agents and all kinds of stuff in these different ports. But basically the thing is they're conducting searches to make sure that no illegal contraband, to include untaxed or undeclared items, is entering the country. Now, once you clear through airport security, airport customs, seaport customs, border customs. Once you clear through that and have entered the country, now the Fourth Amendment applies in its entirety. But at the border and one of the ports, off limits. Okay, so we come to airlines and courthouses, and essentially security there is granted under an implied consent. So the notorious Transportation and Security Administration of the United States government, who likes to give you a good feel up there at the airport whenever you get on an aircraft. The Supreme Court has said, absolutely, you're good to go, just so long as the search is no more extensive or intensive than current technology is available for searching for weapons and explosives, provided that the search is confined in good faith to that purpose alone, and so long as that passengers may elect to avoid screening by electing not to fly. Now, I will tell you, as a personal aside, I object to the entire concept of the Transportation Security Administration and what they do in this exception. But unfortunately, I'm not a Supreme Court justice with the ability to make changes to this sort of thing. And again, this brings about your discussion question. So the thing is the Transportation Security Administration requires the airlines to allow them to screen their passengers in order for the passengers to board their airplanes. And so the thing is you have both ways. You have the airline, which is a private air carrier, a private company, no different than a private university. And you have a private citizen who wishes to fly on this private air carrier's aircraft. And the thing is the federal government has mandated that these passengers who want to get on this privately owned aircraft and fly to wherever must be screened by the TSA or a TSA approved private contractor. So essentially, you'll still be searching by the government. Okay. And they require the airlines to have their passengers screened before they can board the aircraft. Okay. But the TSA doesn't screen passengers on ocean liners. They don't screen passengers on transport trains. They don't screen passengers on Greyhound buses or Los Paisanos that we have here out of Liberal. So that brings up the question for your Chapter 6 discussion, which is, if the TSA is not screening passengers of commercial buses and commercial trains and commercial ships, but they are mandating that you must be screened before you can board this air carrier. One, how is that fair? But two, how is it that the Supreme Court can justify this kind of an intrusion on airplanes, but not trains and buses and ships, especially given that in the other cases where you're talking about like Newman University and students there, that the Supreme Court says the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply at all. You have no Fourth Amendment rights. Okay, so how can the Supreme Court juggle this and justify this intrusion by the TSA at airports that they don't require at train stations, bus stations, seaports, things like that? So that is the big thing there.